Foxstone Park, Vienna, Virginia. The cold, suburban quiet of the afternoon on February 18, 2001, is about to be shattered. A team of Federal Bureau of Investigation agents, concealed in the winter woods, watch as one of their own, Supervisory Special Agent Robert Philip Hanssen, walks to a wooden footbridge. He casually places a package underneath, a dead drop, the classic impersonal exchange of clandestine tradecraft. This drop, however, will be his last. As Hanssen walks back to his car, the arrest team moves in, converging with swift, practiced precision. The 22-year career of one of the most damaging spies in American history is over. The arrest sends immediate, violent shockwaves through the U.S. intelligence community. As investigators begin the frantic, desperate process of damage assessment, sifting through the evidence Hanssen had been preparing for his Russian handlers, a cryptic phrase in the FBI's formal arrest affidavit points to a closely guarded secret of almost unimaginable scale. The government states that Hanssen had compromised an entire technical program of enormous value, expense, and importance to the United States government. This carefully, almost anodyne wording was the key that unlocked a buried history, a story of monumental engineering, breathtaking technological ambition, and devastating human failure, hidden deep in the earth beneath the new Russian embassy on Wisconsin Avenue. The revelation that followed Hanssen's capture, confirmed by his debriefings, was staggering. One of the most audacious, complex, and extraordinarily expensive clandestine operations in American history, a secret espionage tunnel codenamed Operation Monopoly, had been a hollow sham. For more than a decade, the FBI and the National Security Agency had meticulously constructed and operated this sophisticated listening post, believing it to be the perfect, undetectable trap, a pristine, one-way window into the very heart of their Cold War adversary. The truth, as Hanssen's betrayal confirmed, was that the KGB knew about the tunnel all along. The perfect trap had never been set. It had never caught its prey. Instead, for over a decade, it had served as a mirage, a carefully managed stage play where the KGB were the directors and the FBI, the unwitting, captive audience. This is the story of that trap, the monumental engineering that built it, the traitors who broke it, and the perfect counter-trap the KGB built in its place.
The deep-seated paranoia that would eventually drive the United States to burrow under a sovereign embassy on its own soil was not born of abstract theory. It was forged decades earlier in the crucible of post-war Moscow, not in an act of aggression, but in a seemingly innocent gesture of friendship. On August 4, 1945, with the embers of the Second World War still glowing, a delegation of Soviet schoolchildren from an elite pioneer camp presented a gift to the U.S. ambassador, Averell Harriman. The gift was a large, beautifully hand-carved replica of the Great Seal of the United States. Flattered by the gesture, the ambassador hung the seal in his residential study at Spaso House, the very room where he held his most sensitive, high-level, and confidential discussions with visiting diplomats and Washington officials. For 6 years, it remained on the wall, a silent witness, a symbol of a fragile and deteriorating alliance. In 1951, the truth was stumbled upon by accident. A British radio operator stationed at the nearby UK embassy was conducting a routine scan of Soviet Air Force radio traffic. To his astonishment, he began picking up clear, unencrypted American conversations, the distinct voices of U.S. diplomats. He triangulated the source, It was originating from inside the American ambassador's supposedly secure study. This triggered a discreet but intensive counter-surveillance sweep. Finally, in 1952, State Department technicians alerted to the specific frequency, located the source. They carefully disassembled the Great Seal and found nestled inside a device of breathtaking ingenuity. Dubbed the Thing, the device was a marvel of espionage technology, a work of engineering genius created by the Soviet inventor Leon Terremin. It was a passive cavity resonator. It contained no batteries, no power source, and no active electronic components that could be detected by the bug sweeps of the day. It was completely inert, a simple piece of metal, until the moment the KGB wished it to be active. From a surveillance van or a nearby apartment, a KGB team would beam a specific high-frequency radio signal at the seal. This external energy would cause a thin diaphragm inside the device to vibrate in response to the sound waves in the room, the ambassador's voice. These minute vibrations would then modulate the reflected radio beam, which was captured by the KGB receivers, filtered, and demodulated back into crystal-clear audio. When the external beam was switched off, the bug was just a piece of wood and silver, electronically invisible. The discovery was a profound psychological and technical blow to the U.S. intelligence community. The Soviets had demonstrated not only their technical sophistication, but also a stunning, almost theatrical audacity, turning the very symbol of American sovereignty into a KGB microphone, and doing so for 6 years. The U.S., deeply embarrassed, kept the discovery a closely guarded secret. It was only in 1960, following the U-2 incident, that U.S. Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge, Jr., facing Soviet accusations of espionage at the United Nations, dramatically unveiled the bugged seal to the Security Council, physically demonstrating that the game of spying was, and always had been, mutual. This event, this thing, solidified a foundational trauma within U.S. counterintelligence. The American embassy in Moscow was irrevocably compromised, and any future engagement with the Soviets required extreme, proactive, and equally audacious countermeasures. The diplomatic thaw of the 1970s, a period known as détente, brought a new complex challenge. In 1969, the U.S. and Soviet Union signed a landmark agreement to exchange new plots of land for the construction of modern, larger embassy compounds in each nation's capital. The agreement stipulated that construction and final occupancy would be simultaneous, a rule of reciprocity that would have unforeseen and catastrophic consequences for the United States. The United States secured a 10-acre plot in a low-lying, swampy area of Moscow near the Moskva River. The Soviets, in a move that U.S. counterintelligence would come to regard as a strategic disaster, were granted a 12.5-acre site on a long-term lease atop Mount Alto, one of the highest points in Washington, D.C. At an elevation of 349 feet above sea level, the new Soviet embassy complex would command an unparalleled, unobstructed line of sight to a veritable constellation of America's most sensitive locations: the White House, the Pentagon, the State Department headquarters at Foggy Bottom, and the CIA's headquarters in Langley, Virginia. This eyrie, as it became known, gave the Soviets a perfect, unassailable platform for signals intelligence, SIGINT. From their new fortress, KGB and GRU technicians could deploy sophisticated antennas to intercept a vast invisible array of microwave and other radio communications carrying phone calls, data transmissions, and telemetry across the city. Faced with this immense permanent strategic disadvantage, the U.S. intelligence community, spearheaded by the FBI, which has domestic counterintelligence jurisdiction, saw the embassy's construction phase not as a problem, but as a once-in-a-generation ground floor opportunity. The goal became not merely to defend against the new facility, but to turn this defensive liability into a powerful offensive asset. By building surveillance capabilities directly into the embassy's foundations, they hoped to neutralize the Soviet height advantage and gain unprecedented access to the adversary's new nerve center. This aggressive all-or-nothing posture was heavily influenced by the parallel construction of the new U.S. embassy in Moscow. That project, which was being built by Soviet construction crews using Soviet-sourced materials as per the agreement, was rapidly devolving into a security nightmare. U.S. technicians discovered that the Soviets were embedding a vast and sophisticated network of listening devices, antennas, and power sources directly into the precast concrete of the building's structural walls and columns before they were even shipped to the site. The building became so saturated with bugs, a veritable forest of steel antennas, that it was nicknamed the Great Transmitter and was ultimately deemed completely unusable by U.S. security officials. The U.S. was forced to halt construction in 1985, leaving a $300 million empty shell standing in Moscow for years. This experience of being the victim of such a pervasive, structurally integrated technical attack created a powerful confirmation bias within the U.S. intelligence community. It reinforced the deeply held belief that an equally audacious, all-out technological counterattack in Washington was not only justified, but absolutely essential. The game was no longer one of subtle tradecraft. It was an all-out technical war. This singular technology-focused mindset, born of trauma and a desire for revenge, would prove to be a critical, blinding vulnerability.
In 1977, the FBI and the NSA formally launched their counterstroke, Operation Monopoly. It was a joint venture of immense scale and secrecy. The FBI, as the lead domestic counterintelligence agency, took overall command. The NSA provided the state-of-the-art technical expertise and collection systems. And the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, with its specialized classified experience in covert construction and tunneling, was tasked with the physical engineering. The plan was breathtaking in its audacity, a direct echo of the famous Berlin Tunnel operation from the 1950s, but on a more complex, permanent, and technically advanced scale. They would excavate a sophisticated underground passageway from a secure U.S.-controlled location, extending deep beneath Wisconsin Avenue, NW, to a point directly underneath the Soviet embassy's main administrative building, the Chancery, where its most sensitive communication center and code rooms would be located. To facilitate this, the FBI executed the first phase of the operation in plain sight. They purchased a 3-bedroom brick house at 2619 Wisconsin Avenue, NW, a property situated directly across the street from the new Soviet construction site. This house served a dual, critical purpose. First, it was the perfect observation post. The windows facing the site were staffed 24/7 with FBI agents, who, behind drawn curtains, used high-powered cameras and listening devices to monitor and photograph every stage of the embassy's construction, tracking every worker, every delivery truck, every concrete pour.
Second, its basement served as the concealed tunnel entrance, the portal, from which the Army Corps of Engineers would begin their subterranean journey. To ensure a clear, unobstructed view from the house, the FBI even arranged for workers from the General Services Administration to cut down several large mature trees on the perimeter of the Soviet property, a subtle act of landscape architecture in service of espionage. The team of engineers from the Army Corps of Engineers, technicians from the FBI, and specialists from the NSA faced immense, multifaceted challenges. The first, and most critical, was stealth. The Soviets, having executed tunneling operations themselves, were notoriously paranoid about precisely this type of attack. Soviet counterintelligence teams were known to be actively sweeping their own construction site for signs of intrusion, reportedly drilling deep boreholes 30 to 40 feet into the ground around the perimeter and lowering sensitive acoustic sensors and geophones to detect any unusual tunneling activity or seismic vibrations. This meant the American teams had to work in near total silence. All excavation was likely done by hand, a grueling, claustrophobic process. In the cramped tunnel face, crews would have used non-percussive methods, possibly simple entrenching tools and manual drills, to chip away at the earth, a method proven effective in the Berlin Tunnel, Operation Gold, 2 decades prior. The second and equally massive challenge was the disposal of the excavated earth, or spoil. A tunnel of this size, hundreds of feet long, would generate thousands of tons of distinctive subterranean soil. This material could not simply be trucked away from a residential house on Wisconsin Avenue without attracting immediate, fatal attention. The most logical solution, and the one widely believed to have been employed, was a patient, nocturnal operation. The dirt was likely bagged, transported at night in small quantities, and secretly mixed with the massive piles of earth already excavated by the Soviets for their own embassy's foundations, which were being trucked away daily. The FBI's spoil was in effect hidden in plain sight, piggybacking on the Soviets' own construction logistics. The project also faced significant environmental and structural hurdles. The tunnel had to maintain its structural integrity as it passed beneath a massive active construction site with heavy equipment overhead, all while navigating the specific geology of the Mount Alto region. A persistent and vexing problem, according to later reports, was water infiltration. The tunnel, unlike a modern subway, was not perfectly watertight. Crews were reportedly in a constant battle to manage leaks and operate pumps to keep the passageway and its highly sensitive electronic equipment dry and functional. Despite these difficulties, the project was a masterpiece of clandestine engineering. The final product, completed over many months, was not a crude, damp pipe. It was a sophisticated, well-lit and sturdily built complex, reportedly large enough for an adult to stand up comfortably inside, finished with concrete and structural supports. FBI and NSA officials were so proud of their creation, so certain of its secrecy and technical brilliance, that they were known to give highly classified, clandestine tours to select senior government officials and members of Congress who held the requisite top-secret security clearances, showcasing what they believed to be the absolute pinnacle of American engineering and intelligence prowess. This tunnel was conceived as far more than a simple listening post. It was a multi-purpose intelligence gallery, an adaptable platform for a wide range of operations. Its primary functions were threefold. First, direct implantation, to serve as a forward base from which to drill up and plant bugs, sensors, and other eavesdropping devices directly into the embassy's foundations and structure as it was being built. Second, cable tapping, to provide direct, physical access to tap into the embassy's underground power lines for monitoring power consumption, and most critically, its secure communication cables connecting it to the outside world. And third, future-proofing, to act as a long-term adaptable platform for deploying future generations of surveillance technology that hadn't even been invented yet, ensuring access for decades to come. The technology planned for and installed in the tunnel represented the absolute state-of-the-art for the 1980s. The NSA, leading the technical collection, planned an array of advanced sensors. This included highly sensitive wired microphones, some potentially using long, thin tubes or waveguides to allow them to be deeply recessed in concrete, picking up audio from target rooms through tiny, undetectable pinholes. The tunnel itself would have been lined with the era's most advanced data transmission lines, including early fiber optic cables. This was cutting-edge technology. The first transatlantic fiber optic cable, TAT-8, only became operational in 1988, placing the tunnel's design at the forefront of communications engineering, offering secure, high-bandwidth data transmission back to the FBI and the NSA, immune to external Soviet eavesdropping. Rumors also persisted of more experimental, blue sky systems being tested, including laser-based listening devices that could read vibrations off the surface of windows from a distance. This monumental, secret undertaking came at a staggering price. While the exact figure remains highly classified, it reportedly cost hundreds of millions of dollars. No one outside the intelligence community knows the true number. It was, without a question, one of the most expensive and technologically ambitious clandestine operations in U.S. history. This massive investment reflected the immense strategic value the FBI and the NSA placed on the project, a value that, unbeknownst to but a handful of traitors, had already been reduced to zero.
The first crack in the concrete and steel foundation of Operation Monopoly appeared not in the soil of Wisconsin Avenue, but in the corrupted psyche of a disgruntled CIA officer years before the tunnel was even fully operational. The first domino to fall was Aldrich Ames. Ames was a 31-year veteran of the CIA, a second-generation company man who spoke fluent Russian and had risen to the critical and highly trusted position of chief of the Soviet Counterintelligence Division. He was, in effect, one of the very men responsible for catching spies like the one he was about to become. Motivated by a toxic combination of professional frustration at being passed over for promotion, a lavish lifestyle funded by his wife's family money, and a sudden crushing burden of personal debt, Ames made a fateful, treasonous decision. On April 16, 1985, he walked into the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C., and offered to sell America's most valuable secrets to the KGB. During that summer, in exchange for an initial payment of $50,000, Ames delivered a trove of classified information to his new handlers. This initial data dump was, by itself, catastrophic. As Ames himself later stated, he compromised virtually all Soviet agents of the CIA and other American and foreign services known to me. In total, Ames would betray over 100 covert operations and human sources, leading directly to the execution of at least 10 U.S. assets in the Soviet Union. Critically for our story, along with the identities of these human sources, Ames also passed comprehensive information on sensitive U.S. technical operations targeting their new embassy complex on Mount Alto. Unbeknownst to the CIA, and, for a time, even to Ames, another, arguably more devastating betrayal was unfolding in parallel, this time from inside the FBI. Robert Philip Hanssen was a 25-year veteran of the Bureau. He was a skilled, introverted, and technically adept counterintelligence agent who had held a series of positions giving him access to the FBI's most closely guarded secrets, including its most sensitive counterintelligence and technical operations. Hanssen had a brief earlier stint spying for Soviet military intelligence, the GRU, from 1979 to 1981, before inexplicably breaking contact. Then, on October 1, 1985, in what history would later dub the Year of the Spy, Hanssen wrote an anonymous, unsolicited letter to the KGB in Washington offering his services once again. Because Hanssen worked in key counterintelligence analysis units and had access to the FBI's centralized case systems, he had direct, authorized knowledge of Operation Monopoly, the FBI-led program. In September 1989, 4 years after Ames' initial warning, Hanssen delivered the definitive, devastating blow. He provided the KGB with a detailed, comprehensive report on the secret tunnel project. His betrayal went far beyond Ames's more strategic-level warning. Hanssen, as an agent within the lead agency for the operation, was in a position to provide specific, technical, and operational details. He confirmed the tunnel's existence, its precise purpose as a multi-sensor eavesdropping platform, and likely revealed crucial details about its location, its intended targets within the embassy's administrative building, and the specific advanced technologies the NSA planned to deploy within it. The following month, the KGB, recognizing the immense value of this intelligence coup, paid him $55,000 for this intelligence. The near-simultaneous betrayals by Ames and Hanssen, operating independently and unknown to each other, handed the KGB an intelligence victory of historic, almost unprecedented proportions. They now possessed two independent, high-level, and mutually corroborating sources reporting on the exact same top-secret American project. This is the dream scenario for any counterintelligence service. Receiving a single, spectacular report from a high-level mole like Ames is an extraordinary event, but it is still fundamentally just one data point. The information could be incomplete, it could be misunderstood by the agent, or in the paranoid world of espionage, it could even be part of an elaborate deception, a dangle operation by the opposing service. However, the arrival of a second, entirely independent source from a different pillar of the U.S. intelligence community, in this case, the very FBI agency running the operation, reporting on the exact same secret project, provides the ultimate validation. Ames's betrayal, in effect, warned Moscow that the Americans were listening. Hanssen's told them exactly where. This removed all doubt, erased all ambiguity, and elevated the intelligence from merely being credible to absolute certainty. This unthinkable confirmation was the key that unlocked the KGB's masterful and aggressive counterplan. They were no longer merely defending against a suspected threat or a potential vulnerability. They knew with 100% confidence that the FBI and NSA were building a massive, expensive tunnel right under their feet. And most importantly, they knew that the Americans believed with arrogant certainty that their operation was perfectly secure. This complete information domination transformed the tunnel in the KGB's eyes. It was no longer a danger to be neutralized. It was a golden opportunity to be exploited, a perfect, private, high-fidelity channel through which to manipulate their primary adversary. The KGB's response to this intelligence windfall was a masterstroke of patient, sophisticated, and deeply cynical counterintelligence. Their most brilliant and effective move was what they chose not to do. They never publicly discovered the tunnel. They never lodged an outrageous diplomatic protest with the State Department. They never held a press conference to display the captured technology, as they had with the Berlin Tunnel. They never allowed even the slightest hint of their knowledge to leak out. This strategic silence served two critical and interconnected purposes. First and foremost, it provided the ultimate protection for their invaluable moles, Ames and Hanssen. A public discovery of the tunnel, especially one pointing to a precise, recent compromise, would have instantly triggered a furious, no-holds-barred mole hunt within the U.S. intelligence community.
The existence of such a catastrophic, undeniable leak would have confirmed the presence of one or more traitors at the highest levels. The ensuing investigation, empowered with immense resources and political pressure, might have, eventually, through painstaking analysis of access lists and timelines, led to the exposure of Ames or Hanssen, cutting off the KGB's priceless access to the inner workings of the CIA and FBI. By feigning complete ignorance of the tunnel, the KGB kept their prized assets safe and in place, allowing them to continue providing a river of even more valuable intelligence for years to come. Second, this calculated silence turned the Americans' own multi-hundred-million-dollar operation directly against them. By allowing the FBI and NSA to proceed with their ambitious project, blissfully unaware of its compromise, the KGB ensured that the United States would continue to pour hundreds of millions of dollars, countless man-hours from its most skilled engineers and agents, and immense institutional pride and political capital into a project that was not only completely useless, but was now, in fact, under complete Soviet control. The tunnel, the FBI's symbol of ultimate technical prowess, became an expensive, secret monument to American hubris, a massive boondoggle built and maintained for the sole benefit of its target. Armed with the certain foreknowledge provided by Ames and Hanssen, the Soviets implemented a multi-layered and highly effective defensive counter-engineering strategy. Even before Hanssen's definitive 1989 disclosure, their natural paranoia, bolstered by Ames's 1985 warning, had led them to employ extraordinarily stringent security measures during the embassy's construction. Soviet counterintelligence experts, veterans of the Moscow embassy bugging, oversaw every detail. According to one report, they went so far as to X-ray each inch of steel the night before it was put up. They insisted that every window and door frame delivered by contractors be completely disassembled, meticulously inspected for hidden devices, and then reassembled under their direct supervision. In a particularly telling move, they rejected the standard modern construction method for interior marble walls, which involved gluing thin decorative slabs to a backing. Instead, they demanded that all facing be done with solid, 2-inch thick marble slabs, a method specifically designed to eliminate the possibility of listening devices being hidden in the epoxy glue, which was a known U.S. intelligence technique. The ultimate countermeasure, however, was architectural. Knowing that the building's structure itself was a potential listening device, just as their own great transmitter in Moscow was, the Soviets constructed specially designed secure rooms for all sensitive conversations and classified work. These shielded chambers, sometimes called bubbles or cocoons, are essentially armored rooms within rooms, electromagnetically isolated from the main structure of the building, similar in principle to a Faraday cage. They are designed to prevent any sound vibrations or electronic emissions, like from a computer or cipher machine, from escaping, and to block any external monitoring attempts, whether from wired microphones, laser-based vibration sensors, or other exotic devices. All critical communications originating from these secure zones were routed through heavily shielded, dedicated channels, completely bypassing the unsecure underground cables and building infrastructure that the FBI and NSA had hoped to tap from the tunnel below. The tunnel, the FBI's symbol of ultimate technical prowess, became an expensive, secret monument to American hubris, a massive boondoggle built and maintained for the sole benefit of its target. The intended targets of Operation Monopoly, the sensitive conversations of the ambassador and KGB resident, the encrypted traffic from the code room, were simply never allowed to exist in a vulnerable, accessible state. The FBI's elaborate trap was aimed at a target that had been architecturally engineered to be somewhere else entirely. The KGB's masterful strategy, however, may have gone far beyond mere passive defense. This is the nightmare scenario that haunts the U.S. intelligence community.
Did the KGB actively weaponize the compromised tunnel? This type of operation, known in Soviet doctrine as active measures, aktivye meropryatiya, was a core tenet of KGB statecraft, an art form they had perfected, designed to sow discord, mislead political and military decision-makers, and strategically weaken the adversary from within. The logic is as simple as it is devastating. The KGB knew, with certainty, that the FBI and NSA believed they possessed a pristine, perfectly secret source of raw intelligence coming from inside the embassy. This created the perfect, trusted vector for deception. For over a decade, from at least Hanssen's 1989 betrayal until his arrest in 2001, the U.S. intelligence community's most sophisticated analytical minds may have been diligently collecting, processing, translating, and analyzing raw intelligence from this perfect source, entirely unaware that it might have been a curated fiction, a carefully scripted performance staged by the KGB's disinformation specialists. Whether the KGB actively fed the U.S. disinformation or simply allowed the operation to die in silence, reaping the rewards of the Americans' wasted effort, remains one of the Cold War's most tantalizing and unanswerable questions.
The reckoning, the moment the illusion finally shattered, came with the sharp click of handcuffs in the winter quiet of Foxtone Park. Robert Hanssen's arrest on February 18, 2001, triggered an immediate and profound institutional crisis within the Federal Bureau of Investigation. As the agonizing details of his decades-long betrayal emerged during debriefings, the horrifying truth about Operation Monopoly began to dawn on the Bureau's senior leadership. The project they had guarded so closely, the source of such immense institutional pride that they had allegedly given clandestine tours to vice presidents and members of Congress, had been a hollow mirage for at least 12 years, and possibly longer. The institutional shock was profound. The teams of dedicated engineers from the Army Corps, the FBI's technical specialists, and the NSA's analysts, who had poured more than a decade of their professional lives into building, maintaining, and attempting to exploit the tunnel, had to confront the visceral, sickening reality that their monumental effort had yielded. According to FBI officials, the tunnel produced no usable intelligence, one of the costliest dead ends in U.S. espionage. Worse, they now faced the sickening possibility that their work had not just been fruitless, but had been actively used against them to deceive the U.S. government. The immense pride curdled into deep institutional embarrassment, anger, and a desperate need for answers. Then FBI Director Louis J. Freeh, who had personally overseen the final stages of the Hanssen investigation, captured the profound sense of betrayal. Freeh described Hanssen's crimes as the most traitorous actions imaginable for a sworn agent of the Bureau. In the immediate aftermath, the U.S. government scrambled to understand how such a catastrophic, long-running failure of counterintelligence could have occurred and gone completely undetected for so long. Attorney General John Ashcroft appointed a special commission chaired by the highly respected former FBI and CIA Director William Webster to conduct a top-to-bottom, no-holds-barred review of the FBI's internal security programs and culture. The Webster Commission's final, unclassified report, released in 2002, was a scathing indictment of the FBI's deeply flawed internal security culture. It identified significant deficiencies in Bureau policy and practice and concluded that the FBI's security programs in the 1980s and 1990s fell dangerously short of the standards commonly enforced across the rest of the U.S. intelligence community, particularly the CIA and NSA. The report detailed a culture that was insular, complacent, and relied far too heavily on an internal honor system, operating on the dangerous assumption
that FBI agents by their very nature would not commit treason, rather than implementing robust verification systems to ensure they could not. The Commission pointed to specific systemic failures: inadequate financial disclosure requirements for agents in sensitive positions, which would have flagged Hanssen's sudden, unexplained wealth; inconsistent or non-existent polygraph examinations. Hanssen was never polygraphed after 1979 until his arrest; and, critically for a technical operation like Monopoly, a glaring lack of effective computer security and user auditing. The Commission noted that a routine auditing program would almost certainly have flagged Hanssen's repeated, unauthorized searches of the FBI's case systems to see if he himself was under investigation. In his debriefings with the Commission, Hanssen himself pinpointed the Bureau's cultural blind spot. Hanssen stated bluntly, "The only thing that possibly could have uncovered my espionage activities was a complete investigation of my financial positions and deposits to bank accounts." The failure in the end was not of engineering. It was a failure of the most basic counterintelligence principles: trusting but verifying. The physical legacy of Operation Monopoly was quietly erased. After Hanssen's arrest, the FBI sealed off the tunnel. Some say it was filled with concrete, others that it still lies dormant beneath the streets of D.C. It remains a silent, buried monument to a colossal intelligence failure. The Russian embassy, meanwhile, continues its operations from the strategic high ground of Mount Alto. Its occupants, fully and perhaps mockingly aware of the defunct multi-hundred-million-dollar American ambition, buried just feet beneath their feet.
The story of Operation Monopoly, the Washington Tunnel, is not unique in the strange parallel universe of Cold War espionage. In fact, it is a darker, more costly, and more strategically disastrous echo of another famous intelligence failure: Operation Gold, the Berlin Tunnel of the 1950s. The parallels are astonishing, and the differences are crucial. In the 1950s, the CIA and Britain's MI6 executed a similarly audacious engineering feat, constructing 1,476-foot tunnel from West Berlin into the Soviet sector to tap critical Red Army communication lines. Like Monopoly, Operation Gold was compromised from its absolute inception by a high-level mole. George Blake, an officer within MI6, informed his KGB handlers of the plan before the first shovel of dirt was ever moved. But here the stories diverge in a way that highlights the KGB's strategic brilliance. In Berlin, the KGB, under intense pressure to protect their priceless asset Blake, made a calculated decision. They allowed the operation to proceed, but did not inform the target of the tap, the Soviet Army's GRU. The KGB sacrificed its rivals' communications security to protect its own mole. The result? For 11 months, the CIA and MI6 intercepted a massive volume of valuable, authentic intelligence on Soviet military order of battle and operations. Operation Gold, though compromised from birth, was a paradoxical, stunning tactical intelligence success. The KGB only staged an accidental discovery of the tunnel in April 1956, after Blake had been safely transferred away from Berlin, and the propaganda value of the discovery was maximized. Operation Monopoly, betrayed decades later, was a total strategic intelligence failure. The target was not a peripheral military network, but the KGB's own future nerve center in Washington. This time, armed with the absolute ironclad certainty provided by two independent moles, Ames and Hanssen, the KGB did not just passively monitor the operation, they actively managed it. The result was not a year of unexpected intelligence gains for the U.S.,
but more than a decade of receiving zero usable intelligence, all while facing the terrifying possibility of being a willing, eager recipient of carefully crafted KGB disinformation. The parallel histories of these two audacious tunnels, separated by 3 decades and an ocean, offer a single, timeless, and sobering lesson on the true nature of intelligence. They reveal with undeniable clarity that no degree of engineering brilliance, technological superiority, or astronomical financial investment can insulate a clandestine operation from a single critical point of human failure. The insider threat remains the eternal Achilles heel of the most secure systems. The story of the Washington Embassy Tunnel is the ultimate cautionary tale of technological hubris. The FBI and NSA, scarred by the technical wizardry of the Great Seal bug and the pervasively bugged shell of their new Moscow embassy, invested their faith, their pride, and hundreds of millions of dollars in a monumental engineering solution. They built a marvel of covert construction to listen to their adversary in secret. Yet in the end, the most damaging secrets were not carried on copper wires or through fiber optic cables. They were carried out of CIA and FBI headquarters in the minds and briefcases of trusted, vetted senior officers motivated by simple, sordid greed. The perfect trap was not the tunnel the FBI built, but the one that KGB patiently and cynically allowed the Americans to build for themselves.